Hello and welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to take you on a little tour of my studio and I'm going to go through the steps of creating a color study based on photo reference. My photo reference is the farmer's market, one of my favorite subjects. I'll take you through the steps of sketching, creating a no-tan, and then creating a color study for a larger painting. So come and join me. I hope you enjoy. So welcome to my studio. I'm going to give you a quick tour. Essentially what I've done is I've taken the dining room and converted it into my studio. I have a nice armoire style storage cabinet for old canvases. As you can see, I have plenty of wall space to hang work that's in process, finished, and that I'd like to work on, do additional work on. Books. Books are really, really important to me. I refer to a lot of these books, a lot of my favorite artists, to prime the pump. And today, actually, a great book to reference is The Yin Yang of Painting by Hongning Zhang. And he talks about no-tan and developing a black and white study, which I've done with our farmer's market image. I start with a series of sketches, and based on those sketches, based on the no-tan, which is the dark and the light side of those sketches, then I will jump to the color study. So here's an example in which there's your black and white study, and then the larger finished painting. Okay, my brushes. Typically the brushes that I use rosemary flats, and I use some Robert Simmons filberts, sizes 2, 5, and 8 for a smaller study. I use nitro gloves. Since I'm working with oil paints, I do not want to get any chemicals in my skin, especially your hands get dry working with oils. So I use the nitro gloves to keep my hands covered. I use oil medium, a mixture of linseed oil and Gamsol. I use a 50-50 mix and keep it in a bottle in my art cabinet. Here I have an art cabinet full of supplies, more books, plenty of sketchbooks. Keep sketching. Sketching is really important. More brushes, more inspiration. I'm looking at Armin Hansen these days, really enjoying his work. Okay, and then I've got my setup. I have my easel with my canvas on it, and I have my oil paints all set out here. Okay, today I'll be using titanium white, and I've discovered non-cad lemon, cad-free lemon, and cad-free cadmium red, which is great. I'm trying to get away from the cadmiums. Sap green, Prussian blue, and I'll use transparent red ochre. So that will be my palette. As you can see, I've mixed up my shadow color that I will use to block in the study. Okay, so here I'm going to mix up my block-in value. It's going to be a dark, transparent value. I'm using a mixture of transparent red ochre, Prussian blue, and sap green. And then I'll, using those three transparent, deeper tones, come up with a shadow type color to block in the darker values in the painting. Here I'm just adding a little bit of my mixture of 50-50 linseed and Gamsol medium. Okay, I have an example of the photo reference in the upper right hand corner of my farmer's market composition. I am starting by just sketching in
the important parts of the drawing. This farmer's market study is composed of three characters. Right now I'm sketching in, the first character I sketched in was the main character. Now I'm sketching in the background character. It's a grandmother holding probably her grandchild, while possibly the mother of the child or the daughter is selling some of the farmer's market product to a customer. Something that I really love about going to the farmers markets, a lot of our local farmers markets are family-run farms, and so I think it's really wonderful when you see the whole family participating. So that's one of the reasons I was drawn to this composition, is just the interaction between community. So here I'm focusing on those three characters, the three generations, the child selling the product to the customer, um, and then the grandmother in the back holding the grandchild while the mom is working. So part of what I'm doing is I put in the key features. I started in the background with the figures, and I just rough in the figures. I pay close attention to gesture, the angle of the shoulders, the angle of the hips, the tilt of the head and the neck. And when you put in those main parts of the body, then you can go in and block in your shadow areas. So that's what I'm doing right here. I have my main figures in the scene, and I will start with just blocking in the background. So I'm just blocking in the background, putting in the shadow areas. I'm moving between warm and cool colors, um, just quickly putting in some lighter areas, or really not really light, mid-tone areas to indicate that there is light in the background. The, the figures in the scene are in shadow, and the light is just filtering through a tarp or tent, which is over the produce and over the workers. So it's a really interesting color palette. I'm actually using deeper, darker, richer color for the fruits and the vegetables. These are tomatoes, and so there's carrots. I'm putting in the carrots in the background. But a lot of these fruits and vegetables, some are in shadow and some are in light. So right now I'm primarily working with all the shadow shapes. Now you can see as I move to the foreground, I'm bringing in more saturation. So keep in mind that cooler colors will cause things to fall to the background. That's why I've used cool shadows in the background. And then warmer, more saturated tones will bring the eye to the foreground. Now I really like the figure of the grandchild draped over the grandmother's shoulder, and so I'm going to maintain that bright orange t-shirt that the child is wearing in a nice contrast to his blue slacks. That way, as you move into the scene from the left through the produce leads you right up to the child over the grandmother's shoulder. Now that's actually our secondary focal point. The primary focal point is where the majority of the activity is happening, which is between the middle figure, which is probably the mother of the child, and the customer who's purchasing the produce. Now I'm beginning the block-in of the figure, the middle figure. I started with a lighter toned sweater on the figure, and later you'll see that that wasn't working, so I had to go in with a much deeper, darker color. Now, if you were to look at the photograph and compare it to my painting, as you can see, I'm not following the colors in the photo. Uh, Keep in mind that when you are using photo reference, it's really just to get an idea of the scene, how the scene is working, how your characters in your situation environment are working. It's up to the artist to decide what color palette they will decide to use for their particular painting. In this painting, I'm focusing on the complementary colors of red and green, and I'm muting that green. The background is a cooler blue-green, almost a teal, and then as you move into the vegetable area, the fruit and vegetable area, the greens are a lot warmer. So I'm working with a no tan. No tan is the amount of black and white in a particular sketch, drawing, or painting. So this no tan is 2/3 dark, mostly dark tone, and I'll have 1/3 of the painting will be the light side, lighter tones. So when I'm talking about no tan, I'm talking about that 2/3 dark area, which is mostly that teal blue moving into your warmer olive greens. Right now I'm just blocking in the background figure's face without trying to put in too much detail. What I'm doing is I'm modeling the form. I'm not worried about the details of the eyes or the nose. I just want to put in the value pattern of the head of the woman behind the child, mostly focusing on what is the light side of the head and what is the dark side, without focusing on any details as of yet. Initially, you just concern yourself with putting in your shadow areas and your light areas, and you save the details for the end of the painting. Now, since this is a study and it's pretty small, I'm working with smaller brushes. I'm not going to worry too much about getting too detailed with hands. So right now I'm just going in with some light tones, popping out the lights in the background areas to allow the focal point to really come into focus. The focal point being the main character in the center selling produce to the customer on the left. So I blocked in a lot of darker areas, and now I'm going to move into my lighter tones. And for my light color, I'm using titanium white, and then I'm adding a mixture of the cad-free lemon yellow and a little bit of the Prussian blue, keeping my lighter tones, cooler, something that as you're working on your paintings, a small study or a large painting, you're always paying attention to the relationship of colors to one another. So, for instance, right now I'm putting in this cool blue, and that's really helping that light to come in and emphasize the the shopping market bag, the plastic bag that the customer has on her right arm. She's carrying a bag to put the produce in. So I'm moving back and forth between light and cool colors, which have a nice contrast to the warm, deep hues in the shadow areas. So I'm keeping my light tones cool and my shadow tones are warm. And contrast is really great to draw the eye through the painting. And that's my goal. Okay, now I'm moving down into the foreground. I'm starting with the shadow side of some of these heirloom tomatoes in the foreground. So I'm jumping between the light side and the shadow side. In order to do the shadow side of those heirloom tomatoes, I'm taking that cad-free yellow and I'm bringing in a mixture of my initial shadow puddle that I mixed up in the beginning. And just as a reminder, that was a mixture of transparent red ochre with sap green and Prussian blue that gave me a nice deep tone that I can use to mix with my hues in order to create the shadow side on an object. So it is a sunny day and the scene is in shadow, but to draw the viewer through the painting, I'm deciding where will I allow those light tones to pop into the painting and where will I leave, what will I leave in shadow. And this is one area that the artist can take license, deciding what will be in shadow and what will pop out and be in sunlight. Now, as you can see from my reference photo, the figures in the painting are in shadow. They're being covered by a canopy, a tent-like tarp, while some of the produce is right out in the sun. So it's nice to have these nice bright colors in the foreground of the painting that help to draw the viewer into the background, which is dark and in shadow. And using this nice light blue for the edge of the fruit table is a nice way to draw the viewer into the scene. When you're creating your composition, you want to always be thinking about movement. How are you moving the viewer into your painting, and how are you going to move them out of the painting? So in this particular scene, I would say that the viewer is going to be led in through the brightness of the fruit into the shadow area, and then heading over to the left to the main figure who's handing off the produce to the buyer. And then as a secondary focal point, I like the grandmother in the background holding the child. So at this point, I have the painting blocked in, the shadow areas are blocked in, the light areas are delineated, and so now it's just a matter of rendering and modeling the form. Now, since since this is a demo and we're moving quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on every tomato that's in the scene. So I'm going to keep it loose and rough, and I'm focusing primarily on fields of color. So I'm thinking of how the shadow areas of the heirloom tomatoes is to the right and the sun is hitting from the left. So I'm going to go in and put those shadow areas in quickly and loosely, and then I will go in with some bright yellows and lighter colors to put in the light area of the fruit. All of these are mixes of the cad-free red, cad-free lemon yellow, and then my shadow mixture. You don't have to draw every single tomato, just roughly indicate the shape. So you don't have to draw the entire round shape. I'm only hitting the back end of the shape. So I'm not going to worry about too much refinement or too many details at this point. This is a small 12 by 12 inch study, which I will use to reference for a much larger painting. Eventually I will work on a 24 by 24 inch canvas, and at that point I'll give the whole painting a more finished look. And if there's any critical problems that I have not been able to resolve at the level of this study, then I make those resolutions. I make those decisions on the larger canvas where there's more room to be able to do that. Typically, an artist will work with sketches. I showed my initial black and white sketches at the beginning of this demo. Initially, I'll start with visiting the scene, taking lots of photo reference. If I can work on scene, on location, that's always preferable. Typically, the ideal situation is to go to your location, scope it out, work on location if it's feasible, take photo reference of the scene as the time of day changes, because the light and shadows will change. And then you want to go home with your rough sketches or your plein air painting and do any refinements at home. But the goal is to capture the essence of the scene, the feeling, the color, the movement. And here you can see that I even do some blending of colors right on the canvas. Keep in mind that your lights are only as light as your darks are dark, and your darks are only as dark as your lights are light. And what that means is that sometimes you might be painting something and think, wow, it looks lighter and brighter, but for some reason on my canvas I can't get it that white. Keep in mind, colors they react to the color you place next to them. So if you put a light color next to a really deep, rich color, it will look lighter. For instance, these yellow heirloom tomatoes in the foreground look light and bright because they're next to that very, very deep red that is a shadow red. So I've got that shadow red and then saturated red. Those being right next to that bright yellow really helps those yellow heirloom tomatoes pop out. Um, Keep in mind as well, the same with the light spilling over the right arm of the farmer's market figure in the middle. Uh, her The light behind her is only as light as that deep dark blue is blue, and that's where you get that really nice contrast, which you see it's not in the photo. I don't have that really nice value pattern in the photo, so I did make it up and make those determinations in my sketch. I got rid of everything that was too busy in the photo and just simplified everything. And that's what I find to be the greatest challenge, as well as the greatest excitement about painting, is you can take a photo reference or a scene, and based on your aesthetic background and knowledge, you can manipulate the image uh, to work aesthetically better, whether it's through shape or color. The way you might use a line. I'm going in and softening some edges so that some of these tomatoes don't look too graphic. So when you're painting, you're always looking at your edges. You might want some hard edges and some soft edges. A hard edge is going to draw attention to itself, and a soft edge will fall to the background. If you want to draw attention to a particular area, you can give it a hard edge or contrast or texture. A lot of texture will draw the viewer's eye into that area. Right now I'm just going in and working on some details. The bottom of the child's sneakers really help to put his legs in perspective. For these very, very tiny features, I'm using a very small 0 rosemary brush. It's a sable brush, and it's very thin for facial features. Then I'll just go in and do more modeling on that face to give it more volume. working out the shadow side of the face. The best way to render a head of facial features is to start with really looking at the form. What is the shape of the head, and making sure that you have it in correctly in perspective, and you have the shadow side indicated. And that's what I'm working on here, is just working in the shadows in the hair and on the right side of the face. Now just modeling the facial features, working those in. Putting in some details. I did mix up a batch of flesh tones, and I have 4 different values. I have the light side, the dark shadow side, and then two midtones for the flesh tones. So as you see, I'm going in there easily and just putting in those flesh tones. I have already pre-mixed those colors. Okay, at this point, I'm just going in to make a few refinements. I wanted to do a little bit more modeling on the main character's face. So I'm just going in with some subtle values and indicating hairline, plane changes in the face, the shadow on the edge of her nose, shadow in the eye sockets, shadow under the chin. I also went in and put some middle tones into that background so we didn't have too strong of a light band going across the entire background of the painting. This study is pretty much done. Right now it's just minor refinements, and it's up to the individual artist the degree to which you would want to make refinements on a study. But at this point, we pretty much have everything we need. We have the value pattern, we have the color, warm and cool colors, and all those, and we have the focal point and the light source. So I'd say at this point, with this study, you're done. Okay, here is my final finished study. I probably spent an additional 30 minutes going in and refining and modeling the facial features on the 2 characters in the background, and just refining the bag. Small refinements, these are artistic um, choices of the individual artist. But here we are with the finished study.